Hello from Heirloom Books at 6239 North Clark Street, Chicago, Illinois. I'm Jeff Helgeson, and today, talking about a topic that, in contrast to Romanticism, the French poet Charles Baudelaire described as the realistic heroism of modern life. As depicted in visual art, for example, this was represented by the French painter Gustave Courbet, who began capturing scenes of daily activity in works like The Stonebreakers, and issued in 1855 a manifesto of realism that sought the representation of life as it was experienced on a daily basis. In literature, however, Henri de Balzac, who had only lived until 1850, had already, according to J.B. Priestley in Literature and Western Man, established himself as one of the most ambitious of our realistic modern novelists, the planner and architect of the human comedy, the novelist of society itself in Paris or the provinces, town and country, high life, low life, finance, politics, fashionable intrigues, occult researches, everybody and everything. What Balzac had undertaken was a real-world approach to the cosmic notion of Dante's Divine Comedy in a sequence of 100 novels, 91 of which were completed by the time of his death at age 51. The leading idea of this human comedy, Balzac is supposed to have said, came to him in a dream. The idea of the study of human life in comparison with the life of animals. And stated in 1936 Harcourt, Brace and Company, Adventures in World Literature, what Balzac conceived was the most ambitious scheme ever devised by a writer of fiction, nothing less than a complete contemporary history of his countrymen within 19th century France. As observed by E. K. Brown from the University of Chicago in an Introduction to a Modern Library edition of the novel Purgorio, for Balzac, a character's environment, his social center, includes not only the material configurations of the place where he lives, but the spirit of the age and the persons with whom he has to do. The particular zeitgeist, spirit of the age to which Balzac addressed himself, was one of urbanization, capitalism, industrialization, and developing science. It was the time of the Bourbon Restoration, following the fall of Napoleon and preceding the Republican revolts against monarchies throughout Europe that took place in 1848. What the human comedy sought to paint was the whole of French society. Born in 1799, the oldest of 4 children and son of a businessman who had supported the French Revolution and Napoleon Bonaparte, Henri de Balzac moved to Paris with his family after attending college and began writing under various names, as well as engaging in highly speculative business ventures and romantic affairs with a number of aristocratic women, one of whom, interestingly enough, had been a godchild of the famously off-with-her-head, guillotined, let-them-eat-cake Queen Marie Antoinette. In 1833, Balzac established a long-term relationship with a Polish countess whose husband only happened to die 8 years later, although she did not marry the writer until just before his own death in 1850. Within his novels, Balzac, like a sociologist, sought to penetrate the facade of French society and explore the often desperate means by which wealth was obtained and maintained, regularly encountering the corruptions of the world and a sense of disillusionment caused by collective indifference, while consistently demonstrating that success within society, not unlike today, was most often the result of corrupt self-interest. The characters Balzac represented are therefore forced to accept life as it is, without aspirations to any elevated ideals in terms of how it should be. 19th century French society is depicted as being base and corrupt, and yet it was still necessary for people to find some way to survive within it. During the decade of the 1830s, the effort to depict life without illusions was also undertaken by Henri Béal, a one-time member of Napoleon's Grand Army of the Republic, whose nom de plume was Stendhal in a book called The Red and the Black, and later by Alexander Dumas, whose paternal grandmother had been an enslaved woman of Afro-Caribbean ancestry, and whose novels, The Count of Monte Cristo and The Three Musketeers, have been adapted as many as 200 times for stage and film production. Then, in 1848, an article appeared in a newspaper chronicling the suicide of an adulterous and deeply indebted housewife named Veronica Delphine Delmer from a village near the town of Rouen in the French district of Normandy, where Gustave Flaubert had been born 27 years earlier and whose husband had once studied medicine from Flaubert's father. Returning in 1850 from a trip to the Middle East after, according to a Wikipedia article, having left school in Paris following an attack of epilepsy 4 years earlier in 1846, and then contracting syphilis, apparently from one of the male or female prostitutes he'd visited during his travels, the self-described enraged liberal Flaubert appears to have been inspired by real events to devote the next 5 years of his life to searching for le mot parfait, the perfect word, while writing and continually rewriting a novel titled Madame Bovary. This story began to be published in serial form in 1856, 1 year after Gustave Flaubert's Manifesto of Realism, causing Flaubert to be prosecuted for obscenity, although eventually acquitted, which, naturally enough, resulted in the novel becoming an immediate bestseller. Within the book, beginning when a young boy named Charles Bovary enters a new school and finds himself unable to fit in with the other students, a realistic depiction of steadily evolving circumstances is presented. Somewhat poor as a student, Charles only barely manages to become a country doctor, and his mother marries him off to an older woman who soon dies, without, however, leaving her young husband with nearly as much financial security as either mother or son had anticipated. Meeting the daughter of a young patient, the young widower quickly falls in love and proposes marriage. His intended, Emma, however, unfortunately seems to have had a somewhat unrealistic set of expectations regarding what married life might have to offer her. She's read too many romance novels. After being taken to a lavish nobleman's ball, Emma becomes increasingly discontent. Getting pregnant, moving to a new town, and giving birth to a daughter, although she had wanted a boy, the demands placed upon her becoming altogether intolerable, Madame Bovary becomes attracted to a young law clerk is seduced by a rich neighbor and begins spending lavishly before ultimately being abandoned by her wealthy lover and again becoming ill. Meanwhile, back at the medical office, Charles, Emma's dutiful dullard of a husband, engages in a failed attempt at treating the club foot of a local laborer, resulting in the need for the poor man's leg to be amputated by another, far more competent doctor. When Charles takes his adulterous wife to an opera in Rouen, Emma again meets the law clerk, and they begin an affair. Emma then borrows money from a loan shark in order to sustain her inflated lifestyle, and ultimately becomes forced by circumstances beyond her control to propose prostituting herself to her rich, former aristocratic lover if only he would help to pay off her debts, but then takes poison when this proposition is respectfully declined. Husband Charles is subsequently left to mourn the tragic loss of his wife and eventually dies himself, leaving their young daughter to seek out menial employment in a cotton factory. Clearly, a cautionary tale regarding the ill effects of unrealistic expectations. When asked about the character of Emma, however, Flaubert is reputed to have responded, "Madame Bovary, c'est moi." Madame Bovary is me. Now, what he may have meant by that statement remains to be interpreted, as does the extent to which a sense of realism is maintained throughout the novel, Priestley observing that Flaubert is a wild romantic, compelling himself to be an exact realist. Still, it was from his work that the later French writers Guy Maupassant and Émile Zola derived their outlook, representing individuals' principal characteristics as developing from their social environment and the times in which they lived. And this, of course, is not even to mention such realists as Fyodor Dostoevsky, Leo Tolstoy, Anton Chekhov, Heinrich Ibsen, Stephen Crane, Mark Twain, Theodore Dreiser, and John Steinbeck. Yet, sticking with the French, following the fall of Napoleon III and the Franco-Prussian War of 1870-71, Émile Zola, a childhood friend of the artist Paul Cézanne, became a dominant force within literature, journalism, and the extreme political j'accuse controversy surrounding the espionage, conviction, and eventual exoneration of the Jewish French Army artillery officer Alfred Dreyfus. Like Balzac, although on a more modest scale of only 20 novels rather than 100, Zola also planned a series of interrelated works intended to chronicle what he termed the natural and social history of a family under the Second Empire. For me, at any rate, having found both the Masterpiece, book that ended Zola's friendship with Cézanne, and Nana, the ninth installment within the author's series, about the rise and fall of a prostitute who destroys all the men seeking her attention, to be extremely interesting. It's the 13th novel in the sequence, Germinal, that I think is the most significant. In it, the germination of potential social revolution is represented, along with the maturation of an individual revolutionist. Although the living conditions of the impoverished working class described in the book remain unchanged following a dramatic strike, a change in attitude is shown to have resulted, one that suggests hope for the future. The The book begins with a young man fighting a strong wind approaching a mining town in search of some way to at least gain enough income to meet his most immediate needs for survival. Through him and the individuals he encounters, the scope of the novel is expanded, ultimately leading to a commitment to change through lawful methods. Coming to understand that someone must be independent of others in order to be able to act for the good of all, the protagonist becomes compelled to go to Paris and join the international labor movement as a way to assist in helping to bring about the social revolution that he believes to be inevitable. The miners are also changed in their feelings about the revolution, coming to sense that it would be soon, and this time it would be the final blow. The hardships faced by generations of workers have become combined during the strike, the book describes. The result for the miners had crystallized into a strong commitment for change. Walking toward the train station at the end of the novel, beneath his feet, this book's enraged liberal of a central character felt aware that his mates were all there, sharing in a common desire to overturn the earth. What Zola suggests, 18 years after the publication of Karl Marx's Das Kapital, is a call as expressed in the song lyrics of the Internationale to stand up, all victims of oppression, for the tyrants fear your might. Realism, of course, did truly become an international form of expression, well beyond its initial French connection, extending through the 19th and 20th centuries, past the First and Second World Wars, the moon landing, and even the disco era, all the way to the new journalism of Tom Wolfe and his billion-footed beast depiction of New York City in the late 1980s with the bonfire of the vanities. As observed by Eric Auerbach in Mimesis, realism considers political situations, social stratification, and economic circumstances, as well as the attitudes and relationships of the characters represented within a work, connecting them to their historical context and weaving these elements together in a manner more real than had been exhibited in any works of literary art, except those expressly purporting to be political satirical tracts. I'm Jeff Helgeson. Heirloom Books really is located at 6239 North Clark Street in Chicago, Illinois.